The Boston haunting, the entity beneath the colonial floor, beneath a Boston home's colonial floorboards. Something ancient walked the same path every night before dawn for generations. Boston, Massachusetts, stands as one of America's oldest cities, a place where colonial-era structures exist alongside Victorian townhouses and 20th-century buildings in a layered urban landscape that holds centuries of accumulated human experience within its streets and foundations. The city's history encompasses the earliest chapters of American settlement, the tensions of a colonial society, and the industrial and immigrant waves that reshaped its neighborhoods through successive generations. Ed and Lorraine Warren, who spend their careers investigating the paranormal landscape of New England, understand Boston as a city whose sheer historical density makes it a natural site for concentrated paranormal phenomena, a place where the conditions for residual haunting exist in virtually every block of its older neighborhoods, and where the depth of historical suffering embedded in certain locations can provide the energy that adversarial intelligences require to establish and maintain their presence. The Boston case that comes to the Warrens in the 1970s involves a family in one of the city's older residential neighborhoods, in a property that incorporates structural elements dating to the colonial period. The family occupies the home for less than a year before the phenomena begin, and they contact the Warrens through a Boston area priest who has himself visited the property and witnessed phenomena he cannot account for in any natural framework. The priest's testimony carries significant weight with Ed Warren, who knows that clergy members trained in the rational evaluation of claimed supernatural events do not easily attribute phenomena to paranormal causes without exhausting every natural explanation first. The property itself presents as an unremarkable residential structure from its street-facing exterior, a multi-story building whose upper floors reflect late 19th century construction, while its foundation and ground floor incorporate much older elements. The ground floor, the family explains to the Warrens during their initial contact, represents the oldest structural component of the building, with walls and foundation elements that predate the rest of the construction by more than a century. This architectural history, the incorporation of colonial-era structural elements into a later building, immediately signals to Ed Warren the potential for what he terms layered occupancy, where multiple generations of human presence have occurred on a single site, each potentially contributing to the psychic atmosphere that a sensitive investigator might encounter. The Boston haunting presents with a combination of physical, auditory, and visual phenomena that suggest to Ed Warren an active, intelligent infestation of moderate to serious intensity. The property's ground floor, the oldest structural component, incorporating walls that predate the rest of the building's construction, serves as the primary site of activity. Witnesses consistently describe a quality of presence in the ground floor rooms that remains absent from the upper floors, a watchfulness, a sense of being assessed by something that stands just beyond the limits of visible space. This quality of intelligent observation, reported independently by multiple family members, represents to Ed Warren one of the key indicators that distinguishes an active, aware entity from the residual impressions left by traumatic historical events. Physical phenomena in this area include repeated displacement of objects left overnight on the kitchen table and mantelpiece, the spontaneous opening of a specific door that has been secured with a modern latch, and on 2 occasions, the appearance of marks on interior walls, patterns pressed or traced into the plaster surface that the family cannot account for and that disappear within days without being treated. The family photographs these marks before they fade, providing the NESBR documentation team with visual evidence that shows deliberate geometric patterns rather than random damage or natural deterioration. Auditory phenomena concentrate in the pre-dawn hours, a steady, measured sound from beneath the ground floor floorboards that witnesses describe as footsteps, the specific rhythm and weight of a deliberate adult tread that traverses the underfloor space along a fixed path before ceasing abruptly each morning at the same approximate time. The consistency of this phenomenon, the same time, the same path, the same measured pace, suggests to Ed Warren a level of intentionality and pattern that characterizes intelligent rather than random manifestation. Multiple family members verify this sound independently, and the Boston priest who first visits the property hears it himself during an overnight vigil he conducts before contacting the Warrens. Ed and Lorraine Warren travel to Boston and conduct their assessment of the property with the NESBR documentation team. The investigation begins in the early evening to allow for both daytime examination of the physical space and extended observation into the night hours when the most consistent phenomena have been reported. Lorraine's initial walkthrough produces strong impressions concentrated on the ground floor, particularly in the area above the subfloor space from which the footstep sounds originate. She describes the presence she perceives there as ancient in the sense of long establishment, not a recent intrusion, but something that has occupied that space before the current structure exists above it, whose relationship to the physical location predates the building's construction and runs into the soil and foundation below. Ed Warren examines the structural elements of the ground floor with particular care, noting areas where the original colonial masonry stands exposed within later construction, points of contact with the oldest layer of the building's history. His physical and historical examination of the property, combined with Lorraine's psychic impressions, leads both investigators to a consistent assessment. The entity associated with the Boston property represents one of the oldest and most deeply embedded they have encountered, with a connection to the location that measures not in decades, but in generations. This assessment carries significant implications for the intervention strategy that will be required, as entities with deep historical establishment at a location typically demonstrate greater resistance to removal than those of more recent arrival. The depth of the entity's connection to the site becomes clearer as Ed Warren conducts historical research into the property's background. The land on which the building stands has been continuously occupied since the colonial period, with structures documented on the site as early as the late 17th century. The current building incorporates foundation elements and partial wall structures from at least two previous buildings, creating a physical continuity that extends back across multiple generations. For Ed Warren, this continuity represents a key factor in understanding the haunting's character. The entity has not moved from location to location, but has remained anchored to this specific piece of ground through successive cycles of human construction and occupancy. Ed Warren classifies the Boston case as a serious infestation requiring formal intervention based on two converging factors. The first involves the depth and age of the entity's connection to the location, a presence that has occupied a site through multiple generations of human occupancy proves, in Warren's experience, correspondingly more difficult to dislodge and correspondingly more capable of resisting the lighter forms of spiritual intervention. A simple house blessing that might resolve a recent infestation stands insufficient for a presence that has been resident in a location across a time span measured in centuries. The second factor involves the family's reported experience of the presence as actively evaluative, the sense that they are being assessed, measured, observed with a purpose, which Warren associates with intelligent infestation in its intermediate phase, where the entity gathers the knowledge of its occupants that it will later use to target its approach more precisely. The family has not yet experienced the overtly aggressive phenomena that characterize the later stages of full infestation, but the trajectory appears clear, and the window for effective intervention remains finite. Ed Warren explains to the family that entities of this type typically progress through recognizable stages: initial establishment of presence, observation and assessment of occupants, targeted manifestation designed to provoke fear or distress, and ultimately direct interaction or assault. The Boston case, in his assessment, stands firmly in the second stage, with signs suggesting progression toward the third. Intervention at this point, before the entity fully commits to aggressive manifestation, offers the best opportunity for successful resolution with minimal trauma to the family. The spiritual intervention at the Boston property requires the involvement of a senior priest from the Boston Archdiocese, whose authority and experience with residential exorcism Ed Warren considers essential given the depth of the infestation's historical establishment. The ceremony is conducted over 2 separate sessions, the first addressing the ground floor and subfloor space from which the primary phenomena emanate, and the second, a comprehensive blessing of the entire property conducted in the days following the initial rite. The involvement of archdiocesan authority reflects Ed Warren's understanding that cases of significant depth require corresponding levels of spiritual authority to achieve effective resolution. The subfloor space presents the most significant challenge. Accessing it for direct blessing requires physical entry into the area beneath the ground floor boards, which the officiating priest undertakes with Ed Warren alongside him. Lorraine remains above, maintaining her monitoring role and communicating her impressions of the entity's responses to a NESBR team member stationed between her and the priest below. This arrangement allows for real-time assessment of the entity's reaction to the intervention, providing the priest with information about which prayers and ritual elements produce the strongest responses. The subfloor session is described by both the priest and Ed Warren as the most demanding phase of the intervention, an extended period of resistance during which the temperature in the confined space drops to an extreme, and both men report a powerful sense of physical pressure before the culminating prayers produce the resolution they seek. The pressure both men experience manifests as a tangible force, as though the air itself has become dense and resistant to movement. The temperature drop, measured by equipment the NESBR team has placed in the subfloor space, reaches levels that cannot be accounted for by any natural explanation given the insulation and ambient conditions of the surrounding structure. The footstep sounds cease that night and are not reported in the weeks and months that follow. The sense of watchful presence that the family has consistently reported in the ground floor rooms dissipates within days of the intervention. The door that has repeatedly opened despite being latched remains closed. The displacement of objects ceases entirely. The family, who have maintained detailed documentation of phenomena throughout the investigation period, report a complete cessation of all manifestations following the subfloor blessing and the comprehensive property blessing that follows several days later. The Boston haunting is documented in the NESBR case files as one of the more significant urban investigations of the 1970s, a case notable for the age and depth of the entity's connection to the location and for the demanding subfloor intervention that the resolution requires. Ed Warren references Boston area cases in his university lectures as examples of how older American cities, with their colonial-era foundations and centuries of accumulated history, represent a paranormal landscape of particular complexity and depth. These lectures emphasize the importance of historical research in paranormal investigation, demonstrating how understanding the full span of human occupancy at a location provides essential context for interpreting and addressing the phenomena encountered there. The Boston case reinforces Ed Warren's understanding that the age of a location's human occupation correlates with the potential depth of its paranormal activity, that older cities require investigators to think not merely in terms of recent history, but in terms of the full span of human presence on a given site, reaching back to the earliest structures and the earliest suffering that has occurred above and within the soil being examined. This principle, which Warren terms historical depth analysis, becomes a standard component of NESBR's investigative methodology for urban cases, particularly in the historically dense cities of the northeastern United States. The family's recovery following the intervention proves complete, and the specific, measured quality of the pre-dawn footsteps that have characterized the hauntings' most consistent manifestation is not experienced again. Follow-up contacts conducted by NESBR at intervals over the subsequent years confirm the sustained effectiveness of the intervention, with no recurrence of phenomena reported. The family continues to occupy the property, and the ground floor rooms that have served as the primary site of manifestation return to normal use, without any trace of the watchful, evaluative presence that has defined the hauntings' character. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.